When you watch a controlled demolition, there's like this expectation of absolute mathematical precision.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. Like you watch the engineers push a detonator, a single building implodes, and all the dust settles perfectly within this neat, heavily guarded, fenced-off perimeter.
Exactly.
And honestly, we really like to think of modern global events that way too. We want them to be contained, predictable, clean.
We really do.
We expect the fallout of a geopolitical situation to just obey the literal boundaries drawn on a map.
It's a comforting illusion. I mean, we want the blast radius to be neatly categorized so we can look at it from a safe distance and say, well, that's their problem over there, not mine over here.
Right. But then you look at the geopolitical landscape we're dealing with right now, specifically the materials we're diving into today, and suddenly we aren't looking at a controlled demolition anymore.
Not at all.
The fences are completely gone. We're looking at a massive earthquake, and the fault lines are running right under our own feet. So welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, our mission is critical. We are unpacking a stack of excerpts from a newly provided text called Shadows of the Strait, The Looming Global Conflict. The goal is simple, but, ambitious. We want to cut through the endless noise of your newsfeed and understand the actual mechanics of how a regional clash is actively threatening to ripple into a full-blown global crisis.
And untangling that web requires looking past just the immediate headlines. We really have to look at the chain reaction.
Definitely. But before we really get into the weeds, I do want to set a hard boundary for this conversation. The sources we're analyzing today cover a highly volatile, actively unfolding, and intensely politically charged conflict. It involves Iran, the United States, Israel, and several surrounding nations.
Very complicated region.
So I want to be crystal clear with you. This deep dive takes absolutely no political sides.
None.
We are not here to endorse any viewpoints, we aren't assigning blame, and we aren't debating the morality of the actors involved. Our sole objective is to impartially report the facts exactly as they're laid out in the text, so you can understand the scale, the mechanisms, and the real-world implications of what is happening.
That is vital context.
Yeah.
And just to establish our baseline here, the text paints a picture of a world watching a fire spread with, frankly, growing panic.
Yeah.
What began as a localized military confrontation has escalated dramatically. You have leaders all over the world urgently pleading for calm, but the reality on the ground is moving in the exact opposite direction.
Right, it's just accelerating.
Yeah, the battlefield is actively expanding. It's pulling in powerful, well-armed nations, and it is sending serious, tangible shockwaves through global markets.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the absolute best way to understand how a crisis goes global is to start at the physical epicenter. It's like dropping a massive boulder into a small, crowded pond, right? The initial splash is violent, but the resulting waves are violently crashing onto shores that weren't even the initial target.
That's a great way to look at it.
So the source material details that Israeli and U.S.-linked strikes have hit deep inside Iranian territory. And we need to be clear about the geography here. We aren't talking about remote border skirmishes or empty deserts.
No, definitely not.
The text specifically notes these strikes are targeting military command centers, missile facilities, and strategic sites right around Tehran, the capital.
Which is a massive escalation in itself. I mean, hitting near the capital requires penetrating deeply into sovereign airspace.
Right.
It sends a very clear message that no logistical hub or command center is out of reach.
Wow. And Iran's response to that breach is not just playing defense. The text reports direct attacks and threats from Iran against U.S. military interests and allied infrastructure in the Gulf region. Plus, there is this incredibly stark warning from Iranian officials. They've explicitly stated that any possible ground invasion would trigger a massive and fiery retaliation.
And, massive and fiery retaliation is the exact kind of rhetoric that keeps defense analysts awake at night.
I can imagine.
Because it implies a willingness to use overwhelming, potentially unconventional force. But the escalation we're seeing isn't just rhetorical posture.
It's actually happening.
Yeah, it's intensely, violently physical.
Right, and the physical spillover is already underway. The text notes that attacks and military activity have now spread into Lebanon, Syria, the broader Gulf, and nearby maritime zones. It's a total chain reaction.
What's fascinating here is the strategic shift we are witnessing. We've officially moved from a localized series of strikes into a massive multi-front theater.
Yeah, the map is just getting bigger.
Exactly. Modern warfare simply does not respect those neat little lines drawn on our geopolitical maps.
Because a hypersonic missile doesn't care where the border checkpoint is.
Precisely. When you have long-range missiles, advanced drone technology that can loiter for hours, and incredibly intricate networks of military alliances, a conflict inherently wants to spread.
Right.
The kinetic energy of this kind of confrontation naturally spills over. The moment military assets in neighboring countries like Lebanon and Syria are activated or targeted, you are no longer dealing with a dispute between two nations.
No, you're dealing with an entire region catching fire.
Exactly.
But those missiles aren't just crossing land borders, they're flying over water.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the geographical vulnerability that the entire rest of the world relies on.
The maritime zones.
Yes. We are moving straight from the physical spread of the military conflict to the growing instability around the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes.
And this is where this stops being a distant news alert on your phone and starts becoming a very real problem for your wallet.
Oh, absolutely. The Strait of Hormuz is consistently identified by the text and frankly by any global economist as one of the world's most critical choke points.
Just a total bottleneck.
Yeah, it's one of the most important oil shipping routes on the planet. Governments and analysts are terrified of supply disruption here because it inherently carries massive international consequences.
Right.
In fact, the text notes that energy experts are warning this crisis is becoming as severe as the worst oil shocks in modern history. Oil prices are surging, investors are deeply nervous, and global trade routes are basically buckling.
Wait, I have to stop you there because I read that part of the text and my immediate reaction was, well, skepticism.
Okay, fair enough.
We hear the phrase oil shock every time someone sneezes in the Middle East. Wall Street panics, prices jump for a week, and then things usually settle down.
Right, the boy who cried wolf.
Exactly. So why should I believe this isn't just the usual market hysteria we see every 3 years?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, your skepticism makes total sense. Markets do run on sentiment, and they overreact to fear. That's just what they do. But what the experts in the text are warning about goes far beyond psychological panic. It comes down to basic physical geography. Think of the global energy market as a massive, sprawling manufacturing plant.
Okay.
The Strait of Hormuz is a single, incredibly narrow toll booth on the only highway leading out of that plant.
And how narrow are we actually talking?
At its narrowest point, the entire strait is only about 21 miles wide.
Okay, 21 miles.
But the actual shipping lanes, the deep water channels that massive supertankers can safely navigate, are only 2 miles wide in either direction.
Wait, really? 2 miles? That's nothing.
It's a needle's eye. So if military activity, whether that's drone swarms, maritime attacks, or mine laying, makes that specific strait impassable, you aren't just making oil slightly more expensive to ship.
You're cutting it off entirely.
Exactly. If someone crashes a truck in that toll booth, it doesn't matter how many goods the factory is producing. The supply chain is instantly dead. You physically trap a massive percentage of the world's daily energy supply inside the Gulf.
Wow.
You literally starve the global market of supply.
Because there's no backup highway.
No, there isn't. There aren't enough overland pipelines to make up the difference. That's why the text emphasizes that a local war spiraling here could instantly become a massive international confrontation.
It has to be.
The modern world simply cannot function if that specific 2-mile waterway is closed for business.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because that macro-level economic theory, the idea of a maritime toll booth starving the market, translates directly into a microeconomic reality for you, the listener.
It really does.
The text explicitly outlines the domino effect of this fighting. If the conflict continues, it impacts fuel prices, drives soaring inflation, and creates skyrocketing shipping costs. It even threatens global food supply chains.
The causality is brutal and it happens incredibly fast.
It really is wild to think about. I mean, a drone strike near Tehran or a naval maneuver in the Gulf can literally dictate the price of your grocery run. It can delay a vital delivery halfway across the world. The text specifically mentions that the economic impact extends to countries far away from the conflict zone, using India as a prime example.
Right, India.
An event in the Middle East can make a bag of rice in India or your morning coffee in your hometown significantly more expensive almost overnight.
It perfectly deconstructs the absolute fragility of our global logistics. We live in a deeply interconnected era of just-in-time shipping.
So everything arrives exactly when it's needed with no buffer.
Exactly. Let's trace the exact path of that dollar. When the threat of war spikes the cost of fuel and insurance at the Strait of Hormuz, the cost to operate massive cargo ships spikes.
Okay, makes sense.
When those ships have to reroute or pay war zone premiums, the cost to transport raw materials like fertilizer goes up.
And fertilizer is heavy, so shipping it is already incredibly expensive.
Exactly. So when fertilizer becomes exponentially more expensive, the cost for farmers in India or anywhere else to grow crops goes up. Their profit margins just vanish.
Oh, wow.
Yields might drop because they use less of it. When global crop yields drop, commodity prices rise. And finally, that means the cost of the food hitting your local supermarket shelves skyrockets.
So it's all connected.
Turns out, the global economy is just a hyper-efficient machine balancing on top of a very vulnerable shipping lane. The text makes it undeniably clear. Because of this interconnectedness, no nation on Earth is truly shielded from the economic fallout of a major regional war.
It is a sobering realization of just how fragile the systems we rely on every single day truly are.
Yeah, it is.
But as we talk about global economics, massive supertankers, and inflation, we have to bring this conversation back down to the immediate human reality on the ground.
We do.
Because it's that human reality that explains why there's such a desperate international scramble to hit the brakes on this conflict right now. The text reports that millions of civilians across the region are facing fear, displacement, and uncertainty.
It's devastating.
We're seeing large-scale damage to civilian areas, massive transport disruption, and acute humanitarian distress.
And alongside the terrifying physical destruction, the text highlights a very distinct, very modern warfare tactic: internet blackouts.
You know, that part stood out to me so much, the jarring contrast of it all. On one hand, you have the high-tech, ultra-modern reality of hypersonic precision missiles and advanced drone swarms.
Right.
And happening simultaneously, you have the devastatingly fundamental loss of basic human needs. People are displaced from their homes, they are completely offline, and they are literally left in the dark.
The fog of war used to be a metaphor. Now it's an engineered tactic.
Imagine being in a conflict zone, surrounded by explosions and absolute uncertainty, and you can't even send a WhatsApp message to tell your family you are safe.
It's terrifying to even think about.
You have no idea if the road out of your city is clear or if it's an active target.
It isolates entire populations and deepens the humanitarian distress exponentially. It creates panic.
Yeah.
And it is precisely this combination, the massive civilian toll, the very real threat of a global economic meltdown, and the sheer unpredictability of an expanding multi-front battlefield that is driving the diplomatic response mentioned in the source material.
Right, the diplomatic fire breaks. The text notes that active diplomatic channels remain open, and it specifically mentions countries like Pakistan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt.
Yeah.
They are reportedly pushing frantically for talks to prevent this crisis from turning into a full-scale multinational war.
This raises an important question, and it's one the text hints at through its inclusion of those specific names. Why those four nations?
Good question.
If you look closely at Pakistan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, you are looking at a very specific, highly alarming coalition.
Because they aren't exactly best friends.
Far from it.
They don't historically form a monolithic bloc that always agrees on foreign policy.
Not even close. You are looking at nations that constantly vie for dominance and influence in the region.
Right.
Turkey often positions itself as a neo-Ottoman power broker. Saudi Arabia sees itself as the leader of the Sunni Islamic world. Egypt is the historical Arab heavyweight. And Pakistan is a nuclear-armed power with its own incredibly complex regional agenda.
So they have vastly different, often conflicting geopolitical allegiances.
Exactly. So if they're all getting into a room together...
That means something big is happening.
Exactly. That is what makes their involvement so incredibly telling. When historical rivals with varying alignments all unify in a frantic push for diplomatic talks, it is a massive red flag.
Wow.
It signals just how dangerous and uncontrollable the fire has become. None of these regional powers want to see this conflict spill entirely out of control because they know they will inevitably be dragged into the inferno.
Yeah, nobody wants that.
The fact that they are putting aside their friction to try and cap this escalation is a testament to the apocalyptic severity of the threat. But, as the text ominously concludes, for now, the battlefield remains active. The danger level remains extremely high. The fire is not out.
So what does this all mean for you? Let's quickly recap the journey we've taken through this deep dive, because understanding the full scope of this text gives you the exact context you need for the fast-moving headlines you are going to see over the coming days and weeks.
It's essential context.
We started by tracing a straight line from the intense localized military strikes deep inside Iran right up to the capital and the subsequent threats of fiery retaliation.
Yep.
We followed that kinetic energy as it spilled over borders into Lebanon, Syria, and the broader Gulf.
We examine how that physical geographical spread threatens the 2-mile-wide toll booth of the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, acting as a chokehold on the global economy that can hike inflation, disrupt supply chains, and spike food prices as far away as a farm in India or your local grocery store.
Yeah.
And finally, we looked at the devastating human cost on the ground, the blackouts, and the displacement that is driving rival powers like Turkey and Saudi Arabia into a desperate, unified scramble for a diplomatic off-ramp.
You're now armed with the underlying mechanics of this crisis. You know why the dominoes are falling.
You really do.
And as we close out our analysis of these sources, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to explore on your own.
Go for it.
We've just spent this time breaking down exactly how deeply interconnected our world is today. In a hyper-connected modern era, where a single drone strike in a regional dispute can instantly threaten the global food supply, freeze international shipping, and sever the internet for millions in the blink of an eye, is the very concept of a localized war, officially a relic of the past.
Wow.
Can any conflict anywhere on Earth truly be contained anymore?
It's a heavy question, and it brings us right back to where we started today. We all desperately want to believe in the controlled demolition.
We really do.
We want to believe that the engineers can just press a button, the target will fall, and the fallout will stay neatly inside the designated perimeter.
Right. Nice and clean.
But as this text shows us so vividly, we aren't dealing with a building. We are dealing with an earthquake. And the vibrations are meant to be felt by everyone.